At 8 a.m. on December 1st, 1913, a new business opened its doors at the corner of Baum Boulevard and St. Clair Street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was a modest brick building with a single canopy, a small office, and a row of pumps out front. The building had been designed for one purpose only, to sell gasoline to motorists. There were other places to buy fuel before that morning: hardware stores, blacksmith shops, grocery stores, and curbside pumps, but this was different. This was the first drive-in service station built from the ground up specifically for refueling automobiles. It was operated by the Gulf Refining Company. At 8:15 a.m., a customer pulled up in a Model T Ford. The attendant walked out, asked how many gallons, and pumped the fuel by hand. The customer paid, the car drove away. Nothing about that transaction seemed noteworthy at the moment. But what happened inside those next minutes, hours, and years would reshape the American landscape, the economy, and the daily habits of millions of people. The gas station was not born as a cultural icon. It started as a practical solution to a logistical problem. But by the time that first pump clicked over, the machine was already in motion. How did a place to buy fuel become a symbol of freedom, mobility, and roadside Americana? The answer does not begin with petroleum. It begins with the road. Before 1913, America was still a nation of streets and horse paths. Cars existed, but they were playthings of the wealthy. Driving was an adventure that required planning, parts, and luck. Gasoline was sold by pharmacies and hardware stores in 5-gallon cans, often using a funnel and a rag. There was no standard measure, no consistent grade, no guaranteed supply. If you ran out of fuel on a Sunday, you waited until Monday. The problem was that more cars were arriving every year. By 1910, there were roughly 500,000 automobiles in the United States. A new demand had appeared, and the existing system could not meet it. The Gulf Refining Company recognized the opportunity. They hired an architect, worked with engineers, and designed a station that looked professional, clean, and trustworthy. The building featured large windows, a restroom, and a sales area for motor oil and tires. The pumps were visible from the street. The attendants wore uniforms. The goal was to convince the driving public that buying gasoline was not an improvised chore but a routine service, and it worked. Within the first year, the station sold more than 2,000 gallons per week. Other oil companies took notice. Standard Oil of California opened its first service station in 1904. Shell followed in 1905. Texaco, Mobil, and Phillips 66 built their own. By 1920, there were more than 15,000 gas stations across the country. The number doubled by 1905. What happened in those early years was not simply the spread of a retail format. It was the transformation of a product into a place. The gas station became a landmark on the emerging network of paved roads. The timing was not accidental. In 1916, the Federal Aid Road Act committed funds to building rural highways. In 1925, the U.S. highway system was established. Routes like Route 66, Route 1, and the Lincoln Highway began to connect cities and towns. As cars rolled longer distances, they needed places to refuel, rest, and be repaired. The gas station grew from a single pump into a full-service companion to the road trip. By 1929, there were 121,000 gas stations in America. Gasoline was selling for around 20 cents per gallon. A $5 fill-up could take a family across 3 states, but the cultural meaning of the gas station was still being shaped. That changed when the automobile stopped being a luxury and became a necessity. In the 1930s, the Great Depression forced millions of Americans to adapt. Families packed their belongings into cars and drove toward opportunity or away from failure. The gas station was the stop where you could buy a sandwich, use a bathroom, ask for directions, and learn about nearby work. It became a source of information as much as fuel. Station attendants were local authority figures. They knew the roads, the weather, the towns ahead. For a traveling family, the gas station was a sanctuary between the unknowns of the road. World War II changed the gas station again. Fuel was rationed. Tires were scarce. Stations became inspection points for rubber drives and scrap metal collections. Attendants checked tire pressure on a national scale. After the war, the return of millions of soldiers created a demand for housing, jobs, and mobility. The suburbs expanded. The interstate highway system, authorized in 1956, cut through the country. Gas stations were built at every interchange. This is where the idea of the gas station as a cultural icon solidified. In the 1950s and 1960s, stations became part of the visual vocabulary of America. Neon signs shaped the skyline. Station designs evolved. Some looked like colonial houses, others like futuristic pods or flying saucers. Oil companies competed not just on price but on personality. Citgo, Sinclair, and Standard each had their own logo, their own architecture, their own promise. The gas station was no longer just a place to refuel. It was a landmark, a beacon, a memory. Think about a road trip in that era. You load the car at dawn. The map is folded on your lap. The radio crackles with local stations. Every few hours you pull off the highway into a station. The attendant checks the oil, cleans the windshield, asks how the miles have been. You buy a soda from a red cooler. You stretch your legs, you ask how far to the next town, then you get back in the car. That pattern repeated millions of times. It became a ritual. The gas station also became a setting in American storytelling. Movies, songs, and novels placed characters at gas stations for a reason. They were liminal spaces, transitional, temporary, full of possibility. A person could walk in as a stranger and walk out with a new direction. The gas station was the place where journeys paused and decisions were made. It appeared in the work of Edward Hopper, in the films of John Hughes, in the lyrics of Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty. It was never just a business, it was a stage. But as the decades passed, the gas station began to change again. The oil crises of 1973 and 1979 turned stations into sites of tension and waiting. Lines stretched for blocks. Prices climbed from 30 cents to over $1. The image of the friendly attendant faded. Self-service pumps arrived in the 1970s, at first banned in many states, then gradually accepted. By the mid-1980s, the full-service station was a rarity. The attendant was replaced by a machine. The convenience store was attached, then expanded. Stations began selling cigarettes, candy, coffee, lottery tickets, and sandwiches. The building grew larger than the canopy. Gasoline became a loss leader, sold at thin margins to bring customers inside for higher profit items. This was the birth of the modern gas station as a mini-mart. And with that, something of the old character was lost. How did the gas station go from a place of human interaction to a transaction at a screen? The answer lies in the same forces that reshaped every part of American retail: efficiency, cost-cutting, and technology. But the cultural memory remains. There are still stretches of highway where an old station sits empty, its sign rusted, its pumps gone. The windows are boarded, the concrete island is cracked, and yet that empty building still means something. It stands for the road itself, the decisions made, the miles covered, the strangers met. The first gas station opened in 1903. By 2023, there were roughly 145,000 gas stations in the United States. Most of them sell fuel, snacks, and a little bit of history. They are as common as streetlights, as familiar as pavement. But that familiarity hides a deeper story. The gas station became part of American culture because it solved a problem at exactly the right moment, and then it became something more. It became a symbol of movement, independence, and the unremarkable daily miracle of a car that starts every morning. What happens when the gas station stops being necessary? That question is already being asked. Electric vehicles do not need pumps. They charge at home, in parking lots, along curbs. The infrastructure is different. The ritual is different. The gas station as a cultural form may be fading. But before we say goodbye to the station, it is worth understanding how it arrived, what it gave us, and why its story is really the story of the American road itself. On October 17, 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries announced an oil embargo against the United States. It was a response to American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. By November, the effects reached every corner of the country. Gas stations began closing on Sundays. Stations reduced their hours. Some posted signs reading "No gas today" or "Limit 10 gallons per customer." At 6:45 a.m. on November 14, 1973, a driver in New Jersey pulled into a station on Route 1 and found a line already 20 cars long. The attendant stood at the pump with a notepad. He wrote down each car's license plate. He asked for cash only. He sold each driver exactly 5 gallons. By 10:30 a.m., the station ran out. The remaining cars had to leave. That scene repeated across the country. What happened? The embargo was a geopolitical weapon, but the fuel shortage turned it into a domestic crisis. The United States imported about 1/3 of its oil at the time. When Arab nations cut production, refineries had less crude, prices shot upward. The average price of a gallon of gasoline climbed from 38 cents in early 1973 to 55 cents by the end of the year. By 1974, it reached 65 cents. Adjusted for inflation, that was roughly $3 per gallon in today's money, but the price was not the only problem. The supply was unpredictable. Drivers waited in lines for hours. Fights broke out at pumps. Some stations locked their doors at night and sold gas only to regular customers through back windows. The oil companies responded by rationing supplies to their stations. A station might receive only half its normal allocation. Attendants could not guarantee when the next tanker would arrive. The trust that had built up over decades between drivers and stations began to erode. The gas station was no longer a welcoming beacon. It was a source of anxiety. In 1974, the federal government imposed a national speed limit of 55 miles per hour to conserve fuel. That law stayed in place for 2 decades, but the deeper cultural shift was already underway. After the embargo ended in March 1974, the lines disappeared, but the memory remained. Drivers realized that gasoline could be weaponized. Stations realized that their business model was vulnerable. The full-service model, where attendants pumped gas, checked oil, and cleaned windshields, became harder to sustain. Labor costs were rising, margins were thin. Station owners looked for ways to survive. The answer came from an unlikely source: the self-service pump. Self-service gasoline had been tried before. In 1947, a station in Los Angeles allowed customers to pump their own gas, but the idea did not catch on. Most states banned self-service, arguing it was unsafe. The attendant was seen as essential to prevent fires, spills, and theft. But the oil crisis changed the calculation. In 1975, Oregon and New Jersey were the only states that still required full service. Everywhere else, self-service was gradually legalized. By 1980, more than half of all gasoline sold in the United States was pumped by the customer. The shift was not just about safety or cost, it was about identity. The gas station attendant was a working-class icon. It was almost always he knew the neighborhood. He knew which cars came in regularly. He knew the kids. He knew the weather. The self-service pump replaced that relationship with a machine. The driver got out, inserted a nozzle, squeezed the handle, and watched the numbers turn. The human interaction was reduced to a wave through a window or a voice over an intercom. In 1981, the first fully automated gas station opened in the United States. It was in Texas. There were no attendants. The driver inserted a credit card into a reader, selected the grade, and pumped. The machine printed a receipt. That was it. The transaction took less than 2 minutes. The station was open 24 hours a day. It required no staff. The cost of labor was eliminated. Other oil companies watched. Within 5 years, automated pumps were common in major cities, but the gas station did not disappear. It transformed again. Station owners who lost revenue from full service began adding convenience stores. In 1975, the first 7-Eleven with gasoline pumps opened in Tennessee. The combination was profitable. Gasoline brought customers in. The store sold them high-margin items: sodas, chips, cigarettes, beer. By 1985, nearly half of all new gas stations included a convenience store. By 1995, it was 80%. The store became the primary profit center. Gasoline was sold at near cost. The station's appearance changed. The canopy grew larger to cover multiple pumps. The store expanded into a small supermarket. The restrooms were moved inside and required a key. The old station architecture became obsolete. In the 190s, stations were designed to look like houses. In the 190s, they looked like streamlined palaces. In the 190s, they looked like boxes. The cultural meaning shifted accordingly. The gas station was no longer a destination, it was a stop. Drivers pulled in, filled the tank, walked inside for a coffee and a scratch-off ticket, then left. The attendant was replaced by a cashier behind bulletproof glass. Station became transactional. And yet, even in this stripped-down form, the gas station remained woven into American life. It was where you stopped on a road trip, where you bought gas before a first date, where you sat in the parking lot at night and talked. It was still a landmark, even if a less romantic one. That changed again in the early 2000s. The rise of the internet and GPS reduced the need for asking directions. The cell phone ended the need to find a payphone at a station. The station lost its role as an information hub. At the same time, fuel efficiency improved. Cars traveled farther on a gallon. The average number of fill-ups per year dropped. Stations had to sell more non-fuel items to survive. They added car washes, hot dogs, pizza slushies, and lottery terminals. The station became a hybrid, part convenience store, part fast food outlet, part gambling parlor. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck the Gulf Coast. Gas stations in the affected areas were destroyed or shut down. The supply chain broke. Prices nationwide spiked above $3 a gallon for the first time. Lines reappeared. Panic buying emptied stations. The pattern of 1973 repeated, but with a difference. This time, the stations themselves were the source of information. Store clerks posted handwritten signs on the doors: "No gas today," or "Last tanker arrived 3 a.m." Drivers shared tips on social media about which stations still had fuel. The gas station was still a place of last resort and first response. After Hurricane Sandy in 2012, stations in New Jersey and New York ran out of gas for weeks. Generators powered the pumps. Lines stretched for blocks. Station owners drove trucks to refineries themselves to secure supply. The station became a community gathering point again, if only briefly. Now the electric vehicle is rewriting the script. The first modern EV charging station opened in California in 2010. By 2020, there were more than 100,000 public charging ports in the United States. By 2023, the number exceeded 160,000. Unlike gasoline, electricity is sold by the kilowatt-hour, not the gallon. The charging experience is slower. A typical level 2 charger adds about 25 miles of range per hour. A DC fast charger adds about 200 miles in 30 minutes. The driver does not need to stand at the pump. They can park, plug in, and walk away. The gas station as a physical place may not survive this transition. Many EV owners charge at home. They only use public chargers on long trips. The convenience store attached to a gas station may adapt, but the core product, liquid fuel dispensed quickly from a pump, is being replaced. In 2023, electric vehicles made up about 7% of new car sales in the United States. That number is expected to reach 50% by 2035. The gas station industry is already preparing. Some stations are adding chargers. Some are converting to hydrogen or biodiesel. Some are closing. But the gas station's role in American culture may outlast its function. The idea of the station, the place where the road meets the rest of life, has become part of the national imagination. It appears in stories, in photographs, in memories. It is the place where a family stops before a funeral, where a truck driver takes a break, where a kid buys a candy bar after a long drive. The station is not just a building. It is a symbol of the freedom to move and of the infrastructure that made that freedom possible. On July 4, 2024, a driver pulled into a station in Winslow, Arizona. The station was a restored 19500 building with a bright red canopy and a neon sign that read "Stand-in" on the corner. It was named after the Eagles' song. The driver filled his Tesla with electricity from a charge point installed where the old gas pumps once sat. He talked to the attendant, who was wearing a uniform with a name patch. The attendant said he had worked at the station for 30 years. He remembered when it sold leaded regular for 29 cents a gallon. He remembered the lines of 1973. He remembered the change to self-service. He remembered when they added the chargers in 2020. The driver asked if he could take a picture. The attendant nodded. The driver stood next to the charge point. The neon sign buzzed overhead. The heat shimmered off the pavement. It was a single moment, but it contained the whole story. The gas station was still there, still serving, still adapting. It had not disappeared. It had just become something else. But that transformation was not without loss. For every station that adapted, another closed. The number of gas stations in the United States peaked in 1994 at about 220,000. By 2024, that number had fallen to under 150,000. The stations that remained were larger, more efficient, and more corporate. The independent dealer, the man who owned a single station and knew every customer by name, became a rarity. The gas station as a small business was dying. At 9:17 p.m. on the 12th of November 2007, a station in rural Nebraska closed its doors for the last time. The owner, a 72-year-old man named Harold, had operated the station since 1964. He had watched the neighborhood change, he had watched the cars change, he had watched the prices change, but he could not keep up with the cost of environmental compliance. New federal regulations required underground storage tanks to be upgraded or replaced. The price tag was $150,000. Harold did not have that money. He sold the property to a developer who turned it into a parking lot. The station was demolished. The sign that read Harold's service was donated to a local museum. The loss of stations like Harold's was not just an economic story, it was a cultural one. The gas station had once been a place where community news was exchanged, where teenagers gathered after school, where travelers found a bathroom and a map. As the stations disappeared, those functions scattered. The news moved online. The teenagers moved to parking lots of big-box stores. The travelers used smartphones, but the vacuum was real. In many small towns, the gas station was the last public space left. When it closed, the town lost more than fuel. On the 15th of June 1996, a gas station in the town of Needles, California, burned to the ground. The fire started in the engine compartment of a pickup truck at the pump. The driver panicked and drove away, dragging the hose. The station's fire suppression system failed. The flames spread to the store, the canopy, and 2 adjacent buildings. The station was never rebuilt. Needles, a town on the historic Route 66, had already seen its traffic decline after the interstate bypassed it in the 1970s. The loss of the station meant that drivers had to go 20 miles out of their way to the next town for gas. Some never came back. The fire in Needles was a small disaster, but it illustrated a larger pattern. The gas station was vulnerable. It handled flammable liquids. It was exposed to weather, crime, and economic cycles. Its margins were thin. A single mistake could close it. And when a station closed in a rural area, the consequences rippled outward. Elderly residents without cars could no longer get to appointments. Delivery trucks had to reroute. Emergency vehicles had longer response times. The gas station was not just a business. It was infrastructure. At 2:15 a.m. on the 23rd of March 1999, a man walked into a gas station convenience store in Memphis, Tennessee. He was wearing a ski mask. He pulled a gun. The clerk, a 20-year-old college student, handed over the cash register drawer. The man took it and ran. The store had been robbed 3 times in the previous 6 months. The owner had installed bulletproof glass, but the clerk had left the side door unlocked. The robbery was caught on camera. The footage aired on the local news. The station's business dropped by 40% over the next month. Gas station robberies were common. In the 1990s, convenience stores attached to gas stations were among the most robbed businesses in America. The industry responded with security measures, bright lighting, cameras, drop safes, and a policy of not carrying large amounts of cash. Some stations stopped selling cigarettes and beer after midnight. Some closed overnight entirely. The crime wave reshaped the station's design. New stations were built with the cashier enclosed in a secure booth. The pumps were placed farther from the door. The parking lot was lit like a stadium. The goal was deterrence, but the effect was to make the station feel less inviting, less human. By the early 2000s, the gas station had become a fortress. The old open-air station with the glass office and the friendly attendant was all but gone. In its place stood a brightly lit box with 24 pumps and a store that sold everything from motor oil to microwavable burritos. The station was no longer a place to linger. It was a place to get in and get out. But even in this hardened form, the gas station retained its cultural weight. It remained a fixture in American music, film, and literature. In the 1999 movie The Matrix, the protagonist Neo meets his fate in a gas station phone booth. In the 2007 film No Country for Old Men, a gas station becomes the setting for a tense conversation that foreshadows violence. In the 2012 song Gas Station by the band The War on Drugs, the station is a symbol of transience and longing. The gas station had become a mythic setting, a place where ordinary people faced extraordinary moments. On the 17th of August 2005, the photographer William Eggleston was driving through Mississippi. He stopped at a gas station in Greenwood to take a picture. The station was a small, weathered building with a single pump and a hand-painted sign that read "Open." Eggleston photographed it in color. The image later became one of his most famous works. It captured the loneliness and beauty of the southern landscape. The station was not just a building. It was a statement about time, decay, and the persistence of daily life. Eggleston was not the first artist to see the gas station as a subject. In 1963, the pop artist Ed Ruscha published a book called 26 Gasoline Stations. It was a collection of photographs of gas stations along Route 66 between Oklahoma City and Los Angeles. The book was intentionally flat and documentary. It showed the stations without commentary, but the images resonated. They showed a shared American experience. Every driver had seen these stations. Every driver had stopped at one. Rush's book turned the mundane into art. The gas station also appeared in literature. In John Steinbeck's 1962 travelogue Travels with Charlie, he describes stopping at a gas station in Montana. The attendant is a young man who talks about the weather and the crops. Steinbeck buys a map and a bottle of soda. The interaction is brief, but Steinbeck notes that the gas station is the one place where a stranger can ask a question without suspicion. It is a neutral ground, a permission point for human connection. That neutrality was what made the gas station so deeply American. It was a place where social rules relaxed. A person could walk into a station in a strange town and be treated the same as a local. The transaction was simple, fuel for money. The roles were clear. The space was liminal. It existed between destinations. That liminality gave the gas station a special power. It was where journeys began and ended, where detours happened, where unexpected meetings occurred. At 6:40 a.m. on the 1st of September 2017, a driver pulled into a gas station in Rockport, Texas. Hurricane Harvey had passed through the area 2 days earlier. The station was one of the few that had power. The driver needed gas for his generator. He waited in line for an hour. When he reached the pump, the attendant told him the station was out of regular. Only premium was left at $4.50 a gallon. The driver filled up anyway. He later told a reporter that he felt lucky to get any gas at all. The station was a lifeline. Disasters highlighted the gas station's role as critical infrastructure. After hurricanes, earthquakes, and winter storms, stations became hubs. They supplied fuel for emergency vehicles, generators, and personal cars. They also provided food, water, and shelter. In 2012, after Superstorm Sandy, a station in Brooklyn set up a portable generator to run its pumps. The owner gave away free coffee to people waiting in line. The station became a community center. People shared information, charged their phones, and helped each other push cars out of the mud. But the gas station was also a point of failure. When the power went out, pumps stopped working. When the supply chain broke, stations ran dry. When the roads flooded, stations were cut off. The vulnerability was built into the system. The gas station depended on the grid, on pipelines, on trucks, on a fragile network that could be disrupted by a single storm or strike. In 1979, another oil crisis hit. This time it was triggered by the Iranian Revolution. World oil production dropped by about 4%. Panic buying returned. Lines formed again at stations across the United States. In New York, drivers waited for hours. Fights broke out. Some stations began rationing, $10 per customer. Others closed early. The federal government, still scarred by 1973, imposed a new set of price controls and allocation rules. The system was confusing. Stations did not know when their next delivery would come. They raised prices, but the government capped the increase. Margins collapsed. The 1979 crisis was different from 1973 in one important way. This time, the public was angry not just at OPEC, but at the oil companies themselves. The perception was that the shortages were manufactured. Stations were accused of hoarding. The emotional temperature was higher. The gas station became the face of a broken system. Drivers cursed the station owner even though he had no control over supply. In 1980, a station owner in Maryland was shot and killed during an argument over a place in line. The murder made national news. It became a symbol of the desperation caused by the crisis. The gas station, once a place of easy transactions, had become a site of conflict. The tension was not about fuel alone. It was about trust, fairness, and the sense that the American promise of unlimited mobility was failing. After 1979, the oil market gradually stabilized. Prices fell in the 1.98 zeros. Gas stations began to recover, but the scars remained. The public memory of standing in line, of watching the meter spin, of being told there was no gas became part of the national psyche. It was a shared trauma, and it changed how Americans viewed their cars and their roads. The gas station was no longer just a convenience, it was a symbol of dependence. On the 20th of March 2003, the United States invaded Iraq. Oil prices spiked again, but this time there were no long lines. The supply chain held. The gas station had become more efficient. The convenience store had diversified revenue. The station could survive a temporary disruption. The crisis of 1973 and 1979 had forced the industry to build redundancy. It had also taught consumers to hoard differently, but the fear remained. In 2008, oil prices reached $147 a barrel. Gasoline prices topped $4 a gallon for the first time in most states. Drivers changed their behavior. They drove less. They bought smaller cars. They combined trips. The gas station saw a drop in volume. Station owners suffered. Some closed. The market was speaking. The era of cheap gas was over. But the cultural hold of the gas station did not break. It adapted. The station became a place to buy a lottery ticket, to print a document, to pick up a package. In 2013, Amazon installed its first delivery lockers at a gas station convenience store in Seattle. The gas station was evolving into a logistics hub. At 11:52 p.m. on the 31st of December 2023, a driver in Los Angeles pulled into a gas station to charge his electric vehicle. The station was a Shell-branded location with 4 DC fast chargers. He plugged in, then walked into the store. The store was open. The clerk was watching a football game on a small TV. The driver bought a bottle of water and a bag of chips. He stood by the counter for a moment. The clerk nodded. The driver nodded back. Then he walked outside, unplugged, and drove away. The transaction was silent. The station had become a machine. The human contact was minimal, but the station was still there. It still served a purpose. It still marked a pause in a journey. The driver did not think of it as a cultural icon. He thought of it as a utility, but that utility was the foundation of its cultural power. The gas station was so ordinary, so familiar, that it had become invisible, and yet it was not invisible everywhere. In the fall of 2023, a photographer documented the last remaining full-service gas station in New Jersey. It was a family operation in a small town. The pumps were old. The attendants wore uniforms with ties. They cleaned the windshield, checked the oil, and accepted cash. The station had no convenience store. It had no lottery tickets. It had no credit card readers. The owner said he would retire in 2025. He had no successor. His children did not want the business. The station would close. The building would be sold. The photographer asked customers why they still came. One woman said she had been coming since she was a child. She said it was the only place left where someone looked you in the eye when you paid. That look, that human moment, was what the gas station had once been built on. It was what had made the station more than a pump. It was what had turned a transaction into an interaction. And it was what was disappearing. The question, as the electric vehicle took over and the self-service pump became the only option, was whether that interaction could be replaced. Could a gas station still be a part of American culture if it had no people? Could a charger be a landmark? Could a charging station evoke the same nostalgia as a 1950 station with a red neon sign? On the 4th of July 2026, a family drove from Phoenix to Winslow, Arizona. They stopped at the same restored station from the 2024 vignette. This time, the charge point was busy. They waited. The father looked at the neon sign. The mother bought snacks from the store. The children played on their phones. The attendant came out to help a customer with a dead battery. He used the same jumper cables he had used since the 190s. The father noticed and smiled. The family charged their car. They took a picture. They drove away. The station remained. It had become something else again. It had become a place of memory. And memory, more than fuel, is what keeps a culture alive. On the 29th of August 2005, Hurricane Katrina made landfall in Louisiana. The storm surge flooded miles of coastline. Among the hundreds of structures destroyed were dozens of gas stations. But one station in the lower 9th Ward stood somehow intact. It was a small, family-run operation that had been in business since 1960. The owner, a man named Joseph, had boarded up the windows and moved his inventory to the second floor. When the water receded, his station was the only one operating within a 5-mile radius. The station became a hub. Residents walked miles to reach it. They brought empty containers. Joseph pumped gasoline by hand using a manual crank he had kept from the old days. The power was out. The pumps were dead, but the station had a backup generator, and Joseph had stored 200 gallons of fuel in sealed drums. He sold it at cost. He did not raise prices. He did not ration. He gave away water and canned food from his own supply. The station was not just a place to get fuel. It was a place to get news. People gathered on the concrete apron. They shared stories of what they had seen. They exchanged phone numbers. They helped each other find missing relatives. The station became a community center, a command post, a refuge. Joseph later told a journalist that he did not think of himself as a hero. He said he was just running his business, but the business had become something else. What happened in New Orleans was not unique. In the weeks after Katrina, gas stations across the Gulf Coast became lifelines. They were the first businesses to reopen. They were the places where FEMA set up distribution points. They were the locations where insurance adjusters met with homeowners. The gas station had become a node in the emergency network. It was a place of survival. But the gas station also exposed deep inequalities. After Katrina, the stations in wealthier neighborhoods reopened first. They had better generators, better insurance, better cash reserves. The stations in poor neighborhoods stayed closed for months, some never reopened. The disaster revealed that the gas station, like many American institutions, mirrored the economic landscape. It was not a neutral piece of infrastructure. It was a product of the market. How could this have happened? The question was asked by investigators, by journalists, by residents. The answer was complicated. The gasoline supply chain was fragile, pipelines had been damaged, refineries had flooded, trucks could not deliver. The stations that survived were the ones that had prepared. The ones that had not prepared were lost. But the preparation itself was uneven. The system rewarded those who could invest. The system punished those who could not. The aftermath of Katrina changed how the federal government thought about gas stations. The Department of Energy began mapping critical fuel infrastructure. The Department of Homeland Security classified gas stations as essential facilities. New rules required stations in flood zones to have backup power, but the rules were voluntary. Many stations never complied. The cost was too high, the risk was too abstract. In 2012, another storm tested the system. Superstorm Sandy hit the Northeast. The power grid failed. Gas stations ran dry. Lines stretched for blocks. In New York City, the mayor ordered gas rationing, odd-numbered license plates on odd days, even on even days. The system was chaotic. Drivers argued. Fights broke out. The gas station became a battleground again, but this time something different happened. Some stations began to adapt. They installed portable generators. They ran extension cords from nearby buildings. They used hand pumps. The innovation was not elegant, but it worked. The gas station was learning. It was becoming more resilient. What about the gas station's role in American culture beyond crises? The station had always been a place of transition. It was where you stopped before a long trip. It was where you filled up before a date. It was where you bought your first pack of cigarettes. It was where you asked for directions. The station was a landmark, a meeting point, a memory. In the 1990s, the gas station industry underwent a transformation. The number of stations in the United States peaked in 1994 at about 200,000, then it began to decline. By 2024, the number had fallen to roughly 115,000. The decline was driven by consolidation. Large chains bought out independents. The branded stations like Exxon, Shell, and Chevron dominated. The small station with a single pump and a grease pit disappeared. The convenience store replaced the service station. The focus shifted from mechanical repair to quick sales. The gas station became a retail outlet. It sold coffee, soda, chips, lottery tickets, cigarettes, beer, and sandwiches. The profit margin on gasoline was thin, often less than 10 cents per gallon. The profit margin on a cup of coffee was several dollars. The store became the business. The gas was just the draw. This shift changed the culture of the station. The full-service attendant vanished. The mechanic's bay became a storage room. The station became a place of self-sufficiency. You pumped your own gas, you paid at the pump, you never spoke to anyone. The station became efficient, but it also became anonymous. Yet even as the stations became more standardized, they retained a certain power. The highway exit with a gas station was a sign of civilization. The station was a beacon. Its lights burned all night. Its doors stayed open. It was a place where you could always find someone, even at 3 in the morning. That reliability was part of its cultural weight. In 2019, a gas station in rural Kansas became famous after a photographer captured a picture of it during a lightning storm. The image went viral. The station was a single pump with a rusty roof and a faded sign that read diesel. The station had no store, no restroom, no credit card reader. It was a relic, but the photograph captured something essential, the station as a lone outpost in a vast landscape. It was a symbol of solitude and survival. The photographer later said that the station had been abandoned for years. The pump was dry. The sign was falling apart, but people still stopped to take pictures. The station had become a monument. It was no longer a place to buy gas. It was a place to remember. The question of what the gas station meant in American culture was not just about the past. It was about the future. As electric vehicles became more common, the gas station faced an existential shift. The number of gas stations selling gasoline was expected to decline. Some analysts predicted that by 2035, as many as half of all current stations could close. The ones that remained would have to reinvent themselves. Some stations began installing electric chargers. But the economics of charging were different. A gas pump could serve dozens of cars per hour. A fast charger could serve 2 or 3. The revenue per square foot was lower. The infrastructure cost was higher. The convenience store model still worked, but the margins were tighter. The station also faced a cultural challenge. The electric vehicle was quiet. The charging process was slow. The station lost the sense of urgency that had defined the gasoline era. The old station was a place of quick stops and short interactions. The new station was a place of waiting. The change was subtle, but it was real. In 2025, a study by the American Petroleum Institute found that gas stations remained one of the most recognized landmarks in the United States. More than 80% of Americans said they could name a gas station within 5 miles of their home. The station was still a fixture, but the study also found that younger Americans were less likely to have strong memories of stations. They had grown up with pay at the pump and convenience stores. They did not remember the full-service attendant or the smell of leaded gasoline. The gas station was fading from living memory. It was becoming a historical artifact, but it was not disappearing yet. On the 30th of September 2027, the last full-service gas station in the state of Oregon closed its doors. Oregon had been one of the last states to ban self-service. The station had been a holdout. It employed 2 attendants. They wore uniforms. They pumped gas, cleaned windshields, and checked tire pressure. The owner said he could no longer afford the insurance. The station was sold to a developer who planned to build a mixed-use apartment complex. The building was demolished. The sign was donated to a local museum. The closure made national news. Journalists interviewed customers who had driven hundreds of miles to fill up one last time. They talked about the ritual of handing over the keys, of waiting while the attendant did the work, of the small conversation that followed. The loss was intangible, but it was felt. The gas station had begun as a simple mechanical convenience. It had grown into a symbol of American mobility, independence, and culture. It had survived oil crises, hurricanes, economic recessions, and the rise of the internet. It had adapted, it had changed, it had become something else again, and now it was becoming a memory. The question that remained was whether the gas station's cultural role could be transferred to the charging station. Could a place where you sit for 30 minutes become the same kind of landmark as a place where you stop for 5? Could a screen on a charger evoke the same nostalgia as a red neon sign? The answer was not yet clear, but one thing was certain. The gas station had shaped American life for more than a century. It had defined the architecture of the roadside. It had built the patterns of travel. It had created jobs, communities, and memories. It had been a place of both connection and isolation, of convenience and crisis. It was woven into the fabric of the nation. In the end, the gas station was not just a building, it was a story. And stories, even when they end, do not disappear. They become part of the landscape, part of the language, part of what it means to be American. The station remained, it always would. On the 12th of May 2029, a fire destroyed a historic gas station in Winslow, Arizona. The station was known as the Stand-In on the Corner Park Station, a replica of the one described in the Eagles' song Take It Easy. The fire began at 3:47 a.m. The cause was later determined to be an electrical fault in a vintage gas pump that had been kept as a display. The station was a wooden structure with no sprinkler system. The fire department arrived 12 minutes after the first alarm, but the building was already fully engulfed. No one was hurt, but the station was gone. The news spread quickly. Photographs of the charred remains appeared on social media within hours. People posted memories. They talked about the road trip they took to see the station. They talked about the photograph they took with the statue of the man with the guitar. The station had been a pilgrimage site for decades. It was a symbol of the open road of the American West, of a song that had become part of the national soundtrack. Its loss was felt across the country. What happened? The station had been owned by the same family since 1987. They had resisted modernization. They wanted to preserve the original character of the building. They kept the old gas pumps even though they no longer worked. They kept the wooden siding. They kept the neon sign that flickered at night. The building was a living museum, but the cost of installing fire suppression systems was high. The family chose to spend money on other things. That choice sealed the station's fate. Investigators later found that the electrical wiring in the display pump had been frayed. The pump was plugged into an extension cord that ran under the floorboards. The cord was not rated for continuous use. Over time, the insulation wore thin. At 3:47 a.m., a short circuit ignited the dry wood. The fire spread through the walls. By the time the first firefighter arrived, the roof was collapsing. The station was a total loss. The aftermath brought a debate about historic preservation. Some argued that the station should have been protected with modern safety systems. Others said that the charm of the station was its authenticity. The debate was unresolved. The site was cleared. The family decided not to rebuild. A plaque was placed on the sidewalk. It read, "Here stood a piece of Americana." Gone but not forgotten. The station's destruction was a small event in the larger story of the gas station's cultural decline, but it was a reminder that the physical remnants of the gasoline era were disappearing. The station in Winslow was not just a building, it was a landmark. It was a location that existed in the imagination of millions of people who had never been there. The song had made it famous. The movie Thelma and Louise had filmed nearby. The station was a node in a network of shared memory. How could this have happened? The question was not just about one station. It was about the entire infrastructure of the American roadside. Gas station had been built to last, but not to last forever. Many of the stations built in the 1950s and 1960s were already gone. The ones that remained were often in disrepair. They were too small for modern convenience stores. They were too expensive to maintain. They were being replaced by larger, more efficient facilities. The charm of the old station could not compete with the economics of the new, but the cultural role of the gas station was not tied to any single building. It was tied to the idea of the station as a waypoint. The station was where you stopped to ask for directions. It was where you bought a cold drink on a hot day. It was where you saw the dent in your bumper after a fender bender. It was where you learned to drive in the parking lot at night. The station was a backdrop for life. In 2030, the American Sociological Association published a study on the cultural memory of the gas station. The study surveyed 2,000 Americans. It asked them to describe their most vivid memory of a gas station. The responses fell into three categories. The first was the road trip. People remembered the ritual of filling up before a long drive, the smell of gasoline, the crunch of gravel underfoot. The second was the convenience store. People remembered buying candy, soda, or a lottery ticket. The third was the attendant. People remembered the friendly conversation, the windshield cleaning, the tire check. The older respondents were more likely to recall the attendant. Younger respondents were more likely to recall the convenience store. The study concluded that the gas station was becoming a place of transaction rather than interaction. The decline of the full-service station had removed a social ritual. The pay at the pump had eliminated the need to speak to anyone. The station was efficient, but it was cold. The cultural memory of the station was becoming more nostalgic as the reality became more impersonal. What did this mean for the future? The transition to electric vehicles was accelerating. In 2030, electric vehicle sales in the United States reached 40% of new car sales. The number of gas stations had fallen to 90,000. Analysts predicted that by 2040, the number would drop below 50,000. Stations that remained would be concentrated along major highways. The small local station was disappearing. The charging station was the natural successor, but the charging station was a different kind of place. It required time. A fast charger took 20 to 30 minutes. A slow charger took hours. The station was no longer a quick stop, it was a destination. Charging stations began to offer amenities, coffee shops, restaurants, seating areas, free Wi-Fi. Some even had playgrounds for children. The station was becoming a rest stop, but the charging station lacked the history of the gas station. It had no nostalgia, it had no song, it had no iconic architecture. The charging station was designed to be functional, not memorable. The stations were often located in parking lots or behind strip malls. They were signs of progress, but they were not symbols of the open road. In 2031, a small town in Texas decided to preserve its last gas station as a museum. The station was a 1950 Sinclair station with a green dinosaur sign. The town raised funds through donations and grants. The station was restored to its original condition. The pumps were repainted. The restroom was renovated. The oil cans were displayed on shelves. The museum opened on the 4th of July. Visitors came from across the state. They took photographs. They bought postcards. The station was no longer a place to buy gas. It was a place to remember. The museum curator later said that the station represented a time when the road was an adventure. People didn't drive to get from point A to point B, they drove for the experience. The station was part of that experience. It was a checkpoint, it was a place to stretch your legs, it was a place to see something new. The museum was a way to keep that spirit alive, but the museum was an exception. Most gas stations were not preserved. They were torn down or converted into other businesses. The buildings were too small for modern needs. The underground tanks were a liability. The soil was often contaminated with gasoline and oil. The cost of remediation was high. The land was more valuable for other uses. In 2032, the Environmental Protection Agency reported that there were still over 300,000 sites in the United States with confirmed soil or groundwater contamination from leaking underground storage tanks. Most of these sites were former gas stations. The cleanup was ongoing. Some sites had been cleared, others remained on the waiting list. The legacy of the gas station was not just cultural, it was environmental. The question of why the gas station became part of American culture was not simple. It was a question about mobility, economics, design, and memory. The gas station was a product of its time. It was born in the age of the automobile. It grew with the highway system. It adapted to crises and changes. It defined the roadside. It became a landmark. And now it was fading. The stations that remained were different. They were efficient. They were standardized. They were anonymous. But they still held a kind of power. The neon sign still glowed. The convenience store still sold coffee. The pump still delivered fuel. For a few more years, the station was still there. On the 17th of March 2033, a lightning strike hit a gas station in eastern Nebraska. The station was a small independent operation with a single pump and a gravel lot. The strike hit the pump, the fuel caught fire, the fire spread to the station's store. The store was empty, the owner was at home, no one was hurt, the station burned to the ground. The local fire department arrived 30 minutes later. The station was already gone. The fire chief said that the station had been a landmark for generations. His grandfather had filled up there, he had filled up there. His son had learned to drive in the lot. The station was more than a business, it was a fixture. The owner decided not to rebuild. The insurance was not enough to cover the cost of the new underground tanks. The land was sold to a farmer who planted corn. The station was gone. The gravel lot was plowed under. The sign was taken down. The memory remained. The story of the gas station was the story of America. It was a story of progress and loss, of invention and adaptation. The station had started as a simple place to buy gasoline. It had become a meeting point, a landmark, a memory. And now it was becoming a reminder of a time when the road was open and the journey was everything. The station remained, it always would, but it remained in photographs, in songs, in the stories that people told. It remained in the architecture of the roadside, in the shape of the canopy, in the glow of the sign. It remained in the memory of a road trip taken 30 years ago. It remained in the smell of gasoline and the taste of a cold soda. The gas station was part of American culture because it was part of the American journey. It was a place where you stopped, where you paused, where you looked ahead. It was a place of transition. It was a place of possibility. And even as the pumps went silent and the neon signs went dark, the journey continued. On the 1st of July 2034, the last independent gas station in Plainsville, Kansas, closed its doors. The station had been open since 1958. It was a single-pump operation with a gravel lot and a hand-painted sign that read Bob's Service. Bob was no longer alive. He had died in 2019. His son Tom had run the station for the last 5 years. Tom had tried to keep it going. He sold sodas and snacks from a small cooler. He checked oil and tires for regulars. He pumped gas for elderly customers who could not manage the pay-at-the-pump machines, but the numbers did not add up. The profit margin on gasoline was less than 10 cents per gallon. The volume was too low. The underground tank was 30 years old and needed replacement. The cost was $60,000. Tom did not have it. On the morning of the closure, Tom arrived at the station at 6:30. Locked the door, he turned on the pump, he brewed a pot of coffee. A few regulars came by, they filled their tanks, they shook Tom's hand, they said goodbye. At noon, Tom turned off the pump. He locked the door, he took down the sign, he drove away. The station sat empty for 6 months. The tank was removed by a contractor, the soil was tested, there was no contamination, the lot was graded and seeded with grass. The station was gone. What happened in Plainsville was happening across the country. The independent station had been the backbone of the gas station network. In 1950, 90% of stations were independently owned. By 2030, that number had fallen to 15%. The remaining independents were concentrated in rural areas and small towns. They survived on loyalty and low overhead. But as the population aged and younger drivers moved to cities, the customer base shrank. The cost of environmental compliance rose. The wholesale price of gasoline fluctuated wildly. The independent station could not compete with the branded chain that bought fuel in bulk and sold it at a loss. The closure of Bob's Service was not a disaster. No one died, no one was injured, but it was a loss. The station had been a place where people met. It was where the town's news was exchanged. It was where a stranded driver could borrow a phone. It was where a teenager could get a summer job. The station was a social anchor. When it closed, the anchor was lifted. The town's main street lost one more storefront. The street grew quieter. The sense of community, already frayed a little more. How could this have happened? The answer was not simple. It was a combination of economics, regulation, and culture. The gasoline market had consolidated. The major oil companies owned the supply chain from refinery to pump. The independent station was squeezed out. The environmental regulations, while necessary, placed a heavy burden on small operators. The culture had shifted. People wanted convenience, not conversation. The pay at the pump had normalized anonymous transactions. The full-service station was a relic. The independent station was its last stand. The significance of the closure extended beyond Plainsville. It was a marker of a broader transition. The gas station had been a symbol of independence, of the open road, of the American dream. The independent station run by a family was the embodiment of that dream. Its disappearance was not just a business failure, it was the end of a way of life. The road trip was no longer about discovery, it was about efficiency. The station was no longer a destination, it was a utility. In the years that followed, researchers would study the social impact of the vanishing gas station. They would find that communities with fewer stations reported lower levels of social interaction. The station had been a third place, a neutral ground where people gathered. As the stations disappeared, the third places diminished. The town's fabric weakened. The old stations that remained became curiosities. Some were converted into museums. Others were turned into coffee shops or auto repair garages. A few were left to decay, their crumbling canopies and faded signs marking the spot where a journey once paused. The memory of the gas station lived on in photographs, in songs, in the stories that people told. And even as the pumps went silent and the neon signs went dark, the journey continued, but it was no longer the same journey. It was faster, quieter, and lonelier. The station was gone. The road remained, but the road without the station was just a road. The station had made it a story.